You need to understand them, their mind, how they think, what is the pain that they're trying to solve, where do they get their information, what inspires them. I mean, all of these things. And this is reverse engineering the marketing cycle and reverse engineering the marketing process. It's also reverse engineers the sales process.
Hey everyone, welcome to Bright and Early, the podcast for people building early stage startups. I'm your host, Brian Ray. I talk to entrepreneurs, product people, designers, and marketing pros about their experiences during the early days to help you feel just a little less crazy. My guest today is Asia Matos. Asia helps SaaS companies and founders with marketing and growth. She is the founder of Demand Maven, and you can find out more about her there at demandmaven.io. Asia, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. Super excited to be here.
Really, really glad to have you. Can't wait to hear a little bit more about what you're doing, and you talk about on your site at demandmaven.io about getting those first 100 customers. So that's something that I know it resonates with me personally, trying to build an early stage SaaS. And I'm sure a ton of listeners are going to be curious to hear what you have to say about that.
Yes, it is one of my favorite topics. And also, by the time that this is published and live, I should have a brand spanking new case study talking about that exact process, which it's a really exciting story to tell. Really excited to push it out. So by the time that everyone's listening to this, they'll be able to see the new case study, which I'm really excited.
Sweet. Yeah, I can't wait to, I can promise you I will be looking into that myself. So before we dig into all of this, tell us a little bit more about yourself. What's your background and what was your intro to SaaS and online marketing?
Yeah. So my background is 100% in marketing for technology companies and software companies, which is a pretty interesting journey, but just because my degree was definitely not in marketing, but I've always been very interested in technology. So I started my career working for a technology consulting firm for about 4.5 years, decided I really wanted a taste of the product side and went deep into the SaaS world, and more specifically, SaaS and startups here in the city of Atlanta. And for the past 3 years, I've been working with SaaS companies specifically, and of course, startups on the marketing side. And the past 1.5 years, I've been running Demand Maven.
So what was your degree in?
This is a little known fact, but it's actually in art and like painting, oil painting.
Get out. My degree is in art education.
Oh, awesome. Yeah. Okay. So I always love whenever a founder is like, or even just another person in the industry is like, yeah, like I don't really have a background in marketing. And it's like, I don't either. But it just goes to show that really anyone can learn it. Anyone can master it. You just have to be very diligent.
Yeah. Yeah. So I taught middle school art for like 5 years out of when I got out of college, and it was through a crazy winding road that actually started back in my teenage years, but that I got back into technology. But your degree is in studio art, like fine art?
Yeah, fine art. I was going to go the gallery route and bust out paintings, and of course, in the reality, it's definitely not that way. I mean, it can be, but so few, I think, people are equipped to become a professional artist. And I learned very fast that I was just probably not going to be one of those people.
Yeah, well, it's just such a difficult thing to do.
Oh yeah, 100%.
Yeah, having almost nothing to do with talent, and so much more to do with luck and timing. And I mean, certainly you have to be talented and good, but there's an element of just randomness that separates extremely good artists who cannot quite make a living from those who are just the upper tier that everybody knows their name. It's crazy.
Yeah, exactly.
Do you still get a chance to what do you paint?
I actually don't paint anymore, and I'm sure someone listening now is going to be like, "Oh, that's so sad." And it's like, well, I mean, painting was great, but it was so isolationist. Like you have to be by yourself doing it. I actually have turned more to music now. I play the ukulele. I am learning how to play piano now. I'm like saving up to get a keyboard. I'm really excited about. I sing. I do lots and lots and lots of singing. So I still express myself. But I actually kind of prefer performing more than art, but just because don't get me wrong, like I love tucking myself away and focusing on something, but it takes 40 hours to do a good painting for me at least. So it was just like, okay, I need to find something that I can still express myself, but I can do it with and around people. So I've been more into music actually, from like an expressive, like creative perspective.
Yeah. Have you always played music, or is picking up the ukulele something you've done recently?
I did pick it up. I guess I would say recently. I picked it up in like the past year. I played violin for 4 years, years ago. So the instrument itself wasn't that super intimidating. It was really more playing and singing at the same time. That is hard. I've got the hang of it now, but even now, it's like, depending on like what the strumming pattern is, I mean, it can trip you up. So yeah, I would say relatively. Within the past year, I have picked up ukulele.
Have there been things in that process of learning to do something new that has kind of has helped you as you apply that to your work, or?
Yeah.
Surely.
I've never been afraid of learning something new, no matter how dumb I look or how bad I am when I start. I actually find that exploratory, just devouring new information, like that's something I've always been super passionate about. I find that has translated directly into the work that I do for my clients, just in the work that I have done in the past. I pride myself in being very fearless in learning new things. But I will say, I was awful when I first started playing, and now I'm pretty decent. But that's a yes. Oh, completely. But I also think it's important for any business owner, founder, senior leader, whoever you are out there. It's important to have some kind of outlet. And it doesn't have to be purely creative, but some kind of expressive outlet where maybe that's working out, or maybe that's, it could be really anything, but some activity that kind of balances out the, being so focused and thinking about work, et cetera.
Yeah. The fearlessness and the curiosity that I hear you talking about, that comes across in your online, I think, presence and your work. You are fearlessly opinionated. In just in, like the way that your messaging comes across, and your voice is so clear and uniquely yours. So I would love to first of all, I just want to acknowledge that, and I really like the vibe that you put off. I think it's inspirational, and so I'm not surprised to hear that you've got this artistic, creative, expressive side. So I'd kind of love to dig into some of the nuts and bolts now. You say in a one part of your site, that somebody who engages with you for some services or works with you, you say, I'll take a deep dive into your SaaS product, your customers, your competitors, and so much more. Let's talk about that a little bit. I've got an early stage SaaS. Lots of our listeners are building SaaS products or have some, out there. What are you looking for in that process, in that deep dive?
Yes. Okay. So I love this question because it digs deep into every single facet of a business, but then every single facet of the customer. So the first place I start is just taking a look at what the landscape is today. So what does the website look like? What is the actual product? What does it do? What is the pain that it solves? And also during this process, I'm working with the founder typically on understanding how much do they know about that pain? How much do they know about how their product is solving that pain for people? And oftentimes I find, and this isn't that uncommon, of course, but I usually find that the founder has experienced it themselves in some kind of way. So I want to know the backstory. I want to know what inspired it. I want to know the world was like when they built the product and what the world was like now. And then from there, we dig into customers. So I want to understand, how do the customers think about the pain? How do they think about the pain that the product is solving? What do they think about the product? What was driving them to solve for a solution? And who are they on just like a psychological level? Like, what are their psychographics? How do they, what was their career like? Where do they go to for inspiration? Who are these people essentially? And all of those things, based off of the founder's experience and their story, the product that they currently have today, the marketplace, and the actual people paying for it, it creates this. It's really like the perfect atmosphere for obviously continuing to build and sell product. It's so important to start with just that. Those pieces are just mission critical. If we don't understand what all those things look like, then we can't. It's impossible to move forward, because your guess is pretty much as good as mine.
Right. What do you typically observe between the alignment of the founder's backstory and how they were experiencing the pain, and then the customers that you talk to and their experience of the pain?
Yeah.
There's some observations there.
Yeah. So it completely depends on, of course, what the pain is and what the background of that founder is and what drove them to build. But I find that you can usually that backstory is not only to kind of draw a connection between the founder and the customer. I find that when the founder feels really connected to the customer, it's easier for them to think about marketing. It's easier for them to think about the sales process. And part of this exploration on my end is seeing how connected do they already feel based off of what their background is. And this might sound like it's not important at all, and like it's a step to skip. But what I find from a marketing perspective is it's easier to communicate marketing concepts when the founder is very in tune with what the customer is going through. When they're not as aware, or when they're not as cognizant, or when we find that the way that customers are using the product today is just, the intention is just completely different from 5 years ago. We find that there's more gaps to fill, just from an understanding perspective, and just from a okay, well, now I see how people are actually using this. I intended it to be used this way, but now I see that it's being used this way. So now I can kind of shift my perspective and my thinking. So sometimes I find that the founder is extremely in tune with the customer. When that happens, it actually, the marketing process just gets infinitely easier. The product process gets infinitely easier. It gets easier to prioritize features because the founder understands the customer extremely well. But 9 times out of 10, I find that, and this isn't a bad thing per se. It's part of the reason why I'm there. But usually there's a knowledge gap, and so part of my role is to help fill that as much as possible. So that way, any marketing initiatives come from a place of understanding. So that's 100% the reason why we kind of go through the background.
Yeah, totally. I mean, there's so often there's the disconnect between what a business thinks it's selling and what customers are buying. And it's just the benefit of doing the sort of work that you do, working with you in that way. And so I'd love to dig in a little bit more about what you could sort of call the first line of defense, the website. And so if you get a bit of an understanding of the founder's backstory, the pain that they were probably having when they began to solve it, and talking to some customers, what are some things that you end up doing, or what's some of the advice that you might be able to offer to founders who are listening to this right now?
Yeah. So after we kind of take a look at what knowledge gaps there are, if there are any, or what empathy gaps there are, if there are any, the next big step is, okay, cool. Well, let's apply it to your literal first line of defense. And it is, to me, the website. It's the place that it's where people go to sign up for your product. It's where people go to buy. We're not selling brick and mortars here. We're digital. We're on the website, or maybe you have an app that people need to put onto their phones or whatever device. Either way, the website is the first place that's going to communicate your value, but it's also going to be the first place that handles objections. It's going to be the place that just communicates exactly what it is that you're doing. And I find that typically whenever I'm working with a company, it's rare to see a website that is checking all the boxes. In fact, I find that especially in the early days, the website is extremely lean. Depending on your growth strategy and your priorities, it might be okay to have it super lean, but I find that 9 times out of 10, it's just not doing the best job of communicating exactly what customers are looking for and how it provides value to them. So I typically start with strengthening what I would consider bottom of the funnel activity first. And the website is 100% bottom of the funnel. It's where people go to sign up in the first place. So I focus on, okay, what's missing here? What is the number one thing that is preventing people from signing up in the first place? What are we not telling them? A website is your first line of defense when it comes to competitors, but it's also your home. It's the place that you invite people into. It should feel like you already kind of know them and that they already kind of know you. I'm looking for opportunities to make that connection pretty much immediately. And ultimately it doesn't, and this is something I see a lot, I also start with the website because it just doesn't make sense for me to come in and drive a whole bunch of traffic, drive a whole bunch of just acquisition activity around a website that doesn't ultimately inspire people. So I always start with the website first.
Okay. So talk to me more about that and correct my assumption. You said that the website, we should look at that as bottom of the funnel. And
yeah.
Okay, so I would think about I guess in my head, I'm thinking about the website as top of funnel, and or I mean, you'll sometimes see this, right, as like tofu, mofu, bofu, like top of funnel, middle funnel, bottom funnel. So I'm thinking about the website as a top of the funnel asset. So teach me, like fix my mindset there.
No. So I actually don't think that you're incorrect. So I do. Okay. So there are many different ways to think about top of the funnel, middle of the funnel, bottom of the funnel. When I think about each of those buckets, I actually think that the website should be tapping into each of those. It is top of the funnel. It should also provide middle of the funnel, and it should also be the source of bottom of the funnel. Now, I do know that depending on the kind of SaaS company that you are, bottom of the funnel, so a lot of people consider that like the activation stage, like they're already in the product. You need to get them to convert. From a marketing perspective, my top of the funnel, middle of the funnel, and bottom of the funnel, because my background is demand gen. So when I say bottom of the funnel, I mean we're bringing them as close to the product as possible. The bottom of the most funnel step that could possibly happen is, of course, signing up and then, of course, converting. But I actually consider the website to be a part of that. It's where it happens. Yes, top of the funnel activity to me is very much like maybe you're paying for ads, or you've got some co-marketing partnerships, or maybe you've got some integrations or something like that is out there representing your brand and drawing people in. Now, don't get me wrong, it completely depends on who you ask. That is the way that I perceive it. But I do think that the website is in every single one of those stages. Ultimately, I think it just depends on who you're talking to.
Yeah. Design-wise, should we even, is that even a helpful way to visualize it, that as you scroll down, that the website itself is literally going from top of funnel messaging to middle of funnel messaging to bottom of funnel messaging, or am I getting too literal?
Maybe less of a design perspective, much more of a different pages on your website are going to act as different mediums through which you get to bottom of the funnel. Mm-hmm. So I would consider, like, if we were to look at the website in that kind of way and we were to kind of split it up in that way, to me, extremely bottom of the funnel content, that's case studies. That's telling really specific pain solving user stories around like what your product actually does. Because by that point, people are considering, they're product aware. We're trying to get them to the most aware stage and getting them to ultimately convert, whether that's signing up or turning into paid, whichever one, depending on, again, your model. This could look a little different depending on your model. I think that's honestly like the number one thing that kind of dictates like where your website falls into everything. But I find that if we think about the website in terms of really bottom of the funnel activity, that is as close to the product as possible. That means that we're communicating value. We're telling stories about how to use it and how people can be successful with it. We're talking about solving pain. Those are the things that people are typically looking for to sign up in the first place. And then, of course, convert.
Yeah. Are case studies the best concrete example of bottom of funnel content?
It's definitely one. I would say I call them user stories or just customer stories in general. But if you were to, let's say you have multiple personas that could potentially use your product, I would consider like persona specific pages. So let's say you've got a testing application for the QA software tester, but you might also have a senior QA tester. Well, maybe each of those people have like their own like persona page, and we're communicating the value about the product on each of those pages differently, of course, per persona. I would consider that pretty close to bottom of the funnel. We're getting hyper specific. We're unapologetic about talking and showing the product. That is going to be, if we're doing this well, that is going to be what gets people inside and they can see the value themselves. And then from there, you start looking at activation activities. And that's kind of where bottom of the funnel is also prevalent.
Yeah. Okay, great. So let's say we've done that pretty well. And we feel good about the first experience on the site. Let's talk about getting the first 100 customers. How do I do that? How do I go about getting my first 100 customers into my application?
Yes. Okay. I would say that the number one first step, let's say it's built. Let's say you're starting at literally ground zero.
Okay.
Typically, what I find is a lot of founders will go through the process of sales first, which I actually think is very natural, extremely common, and smart. It probably doesn't make sense to jump into marketing immediately. Typically, the first 10 customers just happen because you've talked to a few people, you've told a few friends about it, you've told peers, colleagues, you're actively going through the sales process. After you get maybe the first 10 to 15 customers, and they're real customers, they're paying, they're not just beta users, although some companies do go the beta route, which is just as valid. After you get the first 10 real paying customers, you need to get them on the phone immediately. Get them on the phone. And this always terrifies every founder I talk to. They're always like, oh God, no. But you have to. And the reason why is because you need to understand them. You need to, I mentioned this earlier in the conversation, but you need to understand them, their mind, how they think, what is the pain that they're trying to solve? Like, why did they even entertain you? Why are they paying money for this? Who do they look up to? What is their life like? Where do they get their information? What inspires them? I mean, all of these things. And this is ultimately how you craft. This is reverse engineering the marketing cycle and reverse engineering the marketing process. It's also reverse engineers the sales process, especially if you have a free trial model, self-service. You don't always have the opportunity to sell someone on the phone, especially if that's a strength of yours. And if that's not a strength of yours, then your website's going to have to do a lot of this. And it should anyway. But this is how we start to reverse engineer objections. This is how we start to reverse engineer acquisition channels. You're going to hear channels throughout this process where, oh yeah, I hang out like in LinkedIn all the time. Said no one ever, but that's just an example. But this is where we start to really understand not only who gets the most value, but where do those people hang out? What are their watering holes?
Because, and the thing there is you want to find out where they hang out so that you can start to listen, hang out there, be a valued member of that community as well?
That could be a channel that you didn't think about maybe surfacing your product in. It could also be and the strategy for acquisition looks just miles different for every single product. And that's just because the customers are different. The people are different. No two customers are alike, but there are very big patterns across acquiring the first 100. And your goal as a founder is to identify those patterns. So you might find that there's a group of customers that They're all generally the same kind of persona. They all generally hang out in the same places. They consume the same kinds of content. They listen to the same influencers or what have you. And then you'll have a totally different set of customers, equally as happy. Maybe they're more profitable. They're not online at all. Maybe they are part of like certain associations or integration partners or what have you. I mean, it could look very different. And the ultimate goal is to identify the absolute happiest and best fit customer and figure out where those people are. That is how we reverse engineer the marketing cycle.
Hey friends, this is a great time to pause and let you know that Bright and Early is brought to you by Transistor.fm. Transistor offers you professional podcast hosting and analytics. They host this very podcast that you're listening to right now. And my friends, I got to tell you, it could not be easier. I can tell you from personal experience. As you also probably know, podcasting is becoming one of the best ways to develop a closer relationship with your audience. And so if you're thinking about starting a podcast, trust me, look no further. Just visit transistor.fm, and if you decide to sign up, let them know that Brian sent you. I love that phrase, reverse engineering the marketing and sales cycle. Just removes all the guesswork, or removes a lot of guesswork anyway.
And it's honestly the shortcut. It saves you time, energy, money. I cannot complain enough about how many people are like, okay, cool. So we're just going to do Facebook ads and LinkedIn and and that's it, right? We're going to be done. And it's like, no. Like we gotta, cause you ultimately don't know until you talk to them. So that's why I say, get them on the phone right now.
Yeah.
And it's just a waste of time to assume. And I think that's I'm allergic to assumptions. I can't. It's like the first step.
What are your thoughts on balancing the qualitative, insights that you would get from these conversations with, 10 or so real customers that maybe you got through direct sales or, outreach, whatever, getting them on the phone and getting some qualitative insights? What are your thoughts on balancing that against quantitative surveys, against larger numbers of people?
Yeah, I would say if you in the first 100 customer stage, qualitative is usually the first place that I would start. I find that most founders don't have access to. They might not have a network. They might not have a super engaged list of people that they've just steadily built over the past 5 years. Not everyone has that. If they do, then I would say, yeah, run surveys, do some of the qualitative things. Depending on where a client of mine is, they might actually be far ahead of the first 100, but they're trying to get to the first 100K in MRR. They might have thousands of customers already, but they're trying to figure out how to get to the next stage. I would still balance out both, where we do, the quantitative research and sending out surveys, things like that, but then also balancing that out with, I try to aim for at least 10, 7 is the minimum interviews. That's usually enough to see the patterns. But but I would say if you don't already have an audience, qualitative is going to be extremely valuable. It's also just so important, like I said, for the founder to be close to the customer in that way.
Yeah, and I think early on, I don't want to lead you in that answer or anything, but early on, I think that qualitative feedback is enough to act on. I mean, that's the advantage that you have as an early stage founder is you can act very quickly and you can change course very quickly. And I think that's an advantage that you should lean on. So, okay, let's say if I have zero, I'm early stage, I've got zero budget to invest in marketing. How would you recommend I spend my time?
Yeah. Okay. So if you have absolutely nothing, like you're 100% bootstrapped, which is not uncommon. I work with a few companies that are like that, but they have absolutely no budget. The first thing that I always recommend is, okay, if you don't have budget, do you have time? And usually the answer is like, well, no. And it's like, okay,
not enough anyway.
Not enough. I would actually, So I would focus on high impact free efforts. And this has everything to do with the founder's ability to prioritize. What do they think are the most high impact free marketing activities that they can execute on? Depending on, and this is really taking a hard look at the product at this point, because there are marketing opportunities around product that maybe we just hadn't considered before. So for example, are there any integration opportunities here? Depending on the integration partner, it could cost nothing to integrate except for your time, which if you have, then now we have a little bit of leeway. Integration is one place I like to start. I also like to start with just the website in general. Doesn't cost you anything except for time to build out the website. These things can typically impact the conversion rates just overall in a good way. From there, I would look at building out some kind of, again, high impact free marketing activity like just building an audience in general. It doesn't cost you anything to be a spokesperson for your own company, for your own brand. Doesn't cost a founder anything except for time to build an audience. Mm-hmm. Content creation, it does come up quite a bit. Of course, this does depend on your customer. What are they going to ultimately react to? But I would look at like co-marketing opportunities where maybe you're working with another founder that you know of a company that would work well with your customer base or just your overall product. I mean, there's tons of free things that you can do. They would require time, but they're high impact, which is what I prioritize more probably than anything.
So what if I do have budget?
Okay.
Let's say something between 7,500, 15K. How would you recommend I spend that budget?
Yeah, this is where I would say, let's look at what the funnel currently looks like today. How much traffic do you need to turn into a free trial or a demo? Okay. Could be either one. And then from there, what do the conversion rates look like inside of the product? Because sometimes that bucket of money could be used from like a copywriting perspective. Like let's say we're having issues getting people to convert. We're driving traffic, but people aren't converting as well into the funnel. Well, maybe we could look at copy. We could also look at positioning. We could look at messaging just in general. And after they sign up, we could look at infinitely more bottom of the funnel activities. Like maybe the activation cycle is not strong. So we can leverage that budget to get people to convert into paid because something is missing. So I always like to look at the funnel if we have budget. And then if we really aren't getting any kind of traffic, paid is a really easy thing to turn on, paid media. So like things like AdWords or Facebook, LinkedIn, et cetera. If you're going to spend money on any kind of traffic acquisition in any kind of way, I would try to position it as bottom of the funnel, intent driven as possible. So people are actively looking for solutions to their pain. What are some of the channels that you could pay for that would put you in front of those people? So Facebook is no intent. It's really just persona driven or profile driven. So people aren't looking for a solution in Facebook, but they might be from a search perspective.
Yeah. Okay. Oh man, there's so much I want to dig into on that. I'm going to have to ask you to come back on the show in a couple of months. There's so much good stuff there. People, y'all should definitely go to demandmaven.io. Pay attention to what Asia's doing there. Hey, so before we wrap up here, just two quick questions. First thing, I just want to ask: would you like to talk a little bit about your experience in tech as a woman of color? If so, like, here's the mic. What do you wish more people understood about your experience?
It's an interesting question, and it's one I 100% appreciate you asking, because it's not a story it's not really a platform that I've built in terms of talking about race or I would say gender probably more than race, but I don't have a ton to say about the experience so much as encourage more of us and hire more of us. It's I think touchy to talk about in terms of like my personal experience, but I will say from an encouragement perspective, I am all about encouraging people who don't necessarily look like you, especially in the tech space, and especially for women of color. So if you have the opportunity to encourage a woman of color, or really anyone of color, and anyone who comes from any kind of diversity, not just women of color, but all of us, I would say. If you have the opportunity to encourage someone in tech, please do. And if you have the opportunity to uplift someone who doesn't look like you, please do. That's how we all get better together.
And so finally, thank you for that. So finally, working on startups can make you feel a little bit nuts if you don't actively work on your own sense of calm, state of mind, maintain some sanity. Are there any practices that you have found helpful that you would like to share with all of us?
Yes, I have always been a very vocal person about talking about not only meditation, but just being mindful. For me, it's all about what practices help me build resilience and what practices help me bounce back from disappointment, bounce back from fear, bounce back from anxiety. There's all kinds of different activities and things that you can do, not just from a self-care perspective, but also from just a resilience building perspective. I think it's all about finding what works for you. For me, it's journaling, meditation. I do just lots and lots of talking to friends, spending time with family, and spending time with my husband. All of those things, it just impact my mental well-being and my emotional well-being. And that's really, really, really important to me, not only as a founder, but as someone who works in startups, which is the easiest place to dump all of your time. I would say, yes, like I've got my things. Find your things. Find the things that help you just stay sane and connected and grounded. Though that to me is what is most important.
My guest today has been Asia Matos. Asia, thank you so much for coming on and spending some time with us today.
Thank you so much. This was amazing.
All right, let's do some closing thoughts. I thought that the term empathy gap was such a great summary of what happens over time between, the initial founding of a company, the inspiration of an idea. You're either scratching your own itch or you've observed it so many times, in a handful of your audience base. And then, over time, if you're fortunate enough for the business to grow and for there to be more and more use cases added that you can't personally relate to, that empathy gap just continues to grow. And so I think that's, I don't know, it's one of those things where just having a name for it, I think just kind of gives it a place to live. So I really liked that term, the empathy gap, and how its natural state, its default state, is to want to get bigger over time. This will come as no surprise to you. I think the best way to overcome that is through regular customer interviews, knowing your people and the context that they're struggling in, and what they're trying to do. And so keep that gap very, very small. I thought the bit of the conversation around the bottom of funnel content, middle of funnel, and top of funnel conversation was interesting. If you have an existing product or service that you are trying to sell, then starting from the bottom of the funnel and working up, obviously you want to address all of those pieces over time. But if you have an existing product or service, it's interesting to hear Asia's advice of we'll go one step up from that as you get started, either with workshops or webinars if you're selling services, or with a demo site if you're selling an application. That to begin there, I think, and often this is what I kind of enjoyed about it, is sort of challenged my own default thinking. I think is to start way up at the lead magnet level, and capturing an email address to get people into your flow. Certainly, there's that there are plenty of examples of that as a legitimate approach. And so I think it's just interesting to think through how does that advice apply to my business? What is my offering? Where are my strengths? Who's my audience, and what are they what do they seem to be? What are they asking for? Where did I hear this recently? I'll see if I can find this and drop it in the show notes. But heard somewhere recently, it was basically like, the point of all advice is not that it's ever, or the way that you should hear all advice is not as, set in stone absolute truth. A particular example of something that worked in someone else's context. And that, the point of getting advice is to get a whole lot of it and then ignore it all. And decide for yourself, how does what I have heard apply in my situation? There's just no formula there's just not a formula that you can plug in, start business, do this step, perform this thing. And, because context is so important. I remember getting off on a little bit of a rabbit trail here, but so stick with me. But a handful of years ago, I was at the Business of Software conference up in Boston, and these two speakers came one after the other, and one was like, legitimately, seriously successful, massively scaled SaaS companies. It wasn't Intercom and HubSpot, but it was like Constant Contact and a HubSpot or something like that. Major successes. And these are two VPs, speaking back to back at a conference to founders and SaaS leaders, giving nearly polar opposite advice on a topic. And halfway through the second talk, I just remember kind of laughing at myself and like jotted the note down, in my notebook. Everything works and nothing works, or something to that extent, because like that's kind of how it felt. Was like they're saying the exact opposite. They're giving advice that worked for each of them in their own context. Anyway, to tie it back to what we're talking about here with bottom of like where should you focus if you have a product or service, and presumably you have a website that is trying to sell that thing. What steps should you take? Should you focus on improving your bottom of funnel efforts, which are higher touch, or do you focus up at the top on top of funnel? Let me know what you think. How do you think through that strategy? I'm very, very curious. As I think about my own, consulting services, my own offerings over there, I've certainly thought a lot more. I've given more effort to top of funnel efforts, and so big takeaway for me off of this episode is to think very seriously about high value, near the bottom of the funnel things that I can do for founders and for product leaders. So that's been a pretty interesting thing. I liked, let's see, she was talking about focusing also on high impact free efforts like integrations, leveraging another platform. Tyler Tringus had a interesting tweet. One second, let me find it. Okay, so he says the absolute best way to bootstrap a micro SaaS is to plug into a fast-growing platform like Shopify, Heroku, Stripe. And then he says the Intercom App Store might be the biggest opportunity for this right now. He gives a couple of very specific solutions there, but the overall thought is the best way to bootstrap a micro SaaS, plug into a fast-growing platform. So I thought that was interesting advice from Asia as well. That's a potentially high impact, not free in the sense that it's going to cost you time, energy, development and design, resources, etc., but free in the sense that, Segment, Intercom, those others that were mentioned, have APIs that you can plug into and leverage their growth to get some traction for yourself. Benedict and Jane at User List recently were talking about promoting their it's like one-click seamless integration into Segment. And so that's something that I'm kind of curious to watch and follow them. Like, hey, what sort of impact has that had? So I want, if are there any integrations that you can look at somebody else's growth that you can ride along with as well. Okay, as always, I would love to hear from you. You can head over to brightandearlypodcast.com where you can subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts, and subscribe to the newsletter if you are interested. Stay in touch. Get some more of my thoughts on a weekly newsletter basis, or just shoot me a message on Twitter. I am B-Ray, B-R-H-E-A, as in Baroque, Realism, Harlem, Expressionism, and Abstract. Thanks for listening.
Thanks everybody for tuning in. Listen, if you dig this show and you want to hear more, then please head on over to Apple Podcasts or Google Play and leave a review. It really is the best way to help other people find the show, which is great for my guests, which is great for the show, which then makes it easier to attract more guests. You see where this is going. So if you're listening and you think other folks should be, please leave a review. And if not for me, then do it for the extremely cool group of people who've agreed to be the first guests on my show, knowing that it's brand new with very little to offer them. Jane Portman, Claire Solentraub, Gia Lottie, Margaret Kelsey, Janelle Allen, Andrea Hill, and by the time you hear this, plenty more. These are all really busy people who already have an audience of their own and were so gracious to me when I said, hey, I'm launching a brand new podcast with no listeners, and here's what it's about. Are you game? And they said yes. So if not for me, do it for them. Leave a review, tell a friend, spread the word. And until next time, I'm Brian Ray.